Lonely rancher bought a deaf girl sold by her drunk father. Then realized she heard. Elia's Marin lived where the map stopped being detailed and turned into wide blank space. People in the central cities called it the Rim, like it was a thin line at the edge of something important. But to Elia's, it was simply home. The land was flat for miles, covered in silver grass that bent like waves when the wind moved. Above it, the sky often shimmered with pale green light from distant magnetic storms, and at night the stars looked close enough to touch. His ranch sat alone on that open plain. It was not a ranch like the old stories from Earth, with wooden fences and horses. This one had living fences grown from thick vine plants, solar panels that unfolded like dark wings at sunrise, and biostables where engineered livestock rested in warm light. Elias raised moss cattle, slow animals with soft coats that helped hold water in their bodies. He also tended grain lambs, creatures designed to eat the tough rim plants and convert them into protein-rich wool and milk. The colony needed food, and his ranch helped keep it alive. Elias did not talk much. He spoke to the animals, to the soil sensors, and sometimes to the house system when it asked questions in a calm voice. Most days, his only human contact came from the supply drone that arrived once a week, dropped a sealed crate, and left without staying long enough to feel like company. He was not angry about it. He simply had gotten used to quiet. Still, quiet could be heavy. Some evenings, after he finished his work, he would sit on the porch step and watch the horizon. He would tell himself that he preferred being alone. The Rim was honest. If something broke, you fixed it. If the weather shifted, you adapted. If you needed help, you asked and paid for it fairly. There were no crowds, no loud debates, no people looking into his life like it was their business. Yet sometimes the silence felt like a room with no doors. That was why he decided to go to Port Lysa when the colony broadcast announced a trading day. He did not need much. His stores were fine. But he told himself that a fresh set of water filters would be smart, and maybe a new soil scanner. Those were sensible reasons. He did not admit that he also wanted to hear human voices again, even if only for an hour. Port Lysa was 2 hours away by crawler truck, a thick-wheeled vehicle that could handle the uneven hardpan. Elias drove across the plain while the sun climbed higher. Dust rose behind him in a thin tail. In the distance, the port's landing towers looked like tall fingers pointing at the sky. When he arrived, the port felt like another world. There were people everywhere, farmers, mechanics, traders, pilots, and colony officials. Cargo containers sat in neat rows, and drones buzzed in controlled paths. Loudspeakers called out prices and schedules. The smell of fuel and hot metal mixed with the scent of street food from small stalls. Elias walked slowly through the crowd, keeping his hands in his coat pockets. He bought his filters and a small packet of spare drone parts. He was turning toward the exit when a different sound reached him. It was not loud, but it was sharp in a way that made him stop. An argument. He followed it without thinking, weaving between 2 stacks of cargo crates. The space opened into a side yard near an old office building. A small group had gathered around a portable stage. Elias frowned. A stage on a trading day meant announcements, performances, or auctions, and the faces around it were not cheerful. A man stood on the stage, waving a paper contract in the air. His clothes were messy, and his eyes looked tired and unfocused. The smell of cheap alcohol reached Elias even from a few steps away. Beside the man stood a girl, thin and still. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She did not look at the crowd. She stared at the ground like she was trying to disappear into it. "She's deaf," the man said loudly, slurring some words. "Can't work right, can't follow orders, I'm done with it. Someone take her and feed her at least." The crowd shifted. A woman muttered something angry. A trader with a hard face shrugged like it was just another deal. Elias felt his stomach tighten. He had heard stories about desperate people doing cruel things on bad days, but seeing it in front of him made it real in a way that made his hands go cold. A colony official stood to the side, wearing a clean jacket with a small badge. The official was not smiling. He looked like he had seen this kind of thing before and hated it every time. He spoke into a handheld recorder, keeping it calm and formal. "This is not a sale of a person," the official said, voice firm. "This is a temporary guardianship contract. The colony is short on placement homes. We do not have enough social units on the Rim. If no one accepts guardianship, she will be moved to central shelter, and transport won't be available for 3 weeks. The man on the stage laughed in an ugly way. 3 weeks. I won't feed her 3 more days. The girl did not move, she did not flinch. It was like she had built a wall inside herself so thick that nothing could reach her. Elias took 1 step closer, then another. His mind was running through reasons to leave. It was not his problem. He had no experience with children. His ranch was isolated. He was busy. He was not equipped. But then the girl lifted her head just slightly, and her eyes met the horizon beyond the port, as if she was looking past all of them to something far away. Her face was calm but not empty. It was a calm that looked like someone holding their breath for a long time. Elias looked at the official. "How does the contract work?" he asked. The official turned, surprised to hear a new voice. "You accept guardianship," he said. "You provide housing, food, basic education access, and safety. You cannot treat her as labor. You cannot isolate her from required check-ins. A care officer will visit monthly. She retains full rights as a citizen. This is protection, not ownership." Elias nodded slowly. "How long?" "Minimum 6 months," the official said. "Renewable if needed. If a family member becomes stable and is approved, she can be returned. Otherwise, we continue placement until adulthood or a long-term guardian is approved." The drunk man heard and leaned forward, pointing at Elias. "You want her? Fine, take her. I need the credit." The official snapped. "Your compensation is limited and most goes to the child's account. That is colony law." The man cursed, then waved a hand like he did not care. "Whatever, just sign it." Elias looked at the girl again. She was very young, maybe 12 or 13. Her clothes were too big, like they had belonged to someone else. Her hair was tied back in a quick knot. There was dirt under her fingernails, the kind you got from helping in gardens or fixing things. She looked like she had worked hard for someone who never thanked her. Elias took a breath. "I'll do it," he said. The crowd murmured. Some looked relieved, others looked doubtful. The official's face softened by a small amount, like a tight knot loosening. He stepped toward Elias with the contract tablet. "Name?" the official asked. "Elias Marin," Elias said. The official tapped quickly. "Rancher, Rim Sector, single adult household." He paused. "You understand the responsibilities?" "Yes," Elias said, though he understood only the shape of them, not the full weight. The drunk man signed with a shaky finger. Elias signed after him, steady and clear. The official stamped the contract. A small light on the tablet turned green. "It's done," the official said. He crouched slightly to bring his face closer to the girl's level. "Your guardian is Elias Marin. You're safe now. Do you understand?" The girl's eyes flicked to the official's mouth, watching the movement of his lips. Then she looked at Elias. Her gaze was steady, not trusting, not afraid, just measuring, like she had learned to read people quickly because she had to. Elias cleared his throat. "I'm Elias," he said slowly, trying to make his mouth movements clear. "You can come with me if you want." She did not answer, but after a moment she stepped off the stage. The drunk man turned away immediately, already looking for someone else to argue with. The crowd began to break apart, the moment losing interest now that it was resolved. Elias wanted to shout at them all for how normal it seemed, but he swallowed it. Anger would not help the girl, and he had just promised to help. The official handed Elias a small device. "This is her ID band," he said. "It links to medical and education services. Name listed is Myra Cade. Her hearing status is recorded as profound loss, but the file is incomplete. Central Shelter will send the rest." Elias nodded. "Thank you." The official looked tired. "Thank you," he corrected quietly. "Not me." Elias led Myra through the port. He moved slowly so she could follow. He noticed that she kept a careful distance, not too far, not too close. She watched everything, the paths of drones, the movement of people, the way sunlight reflected off metal. It was not the staring of someone lost. It was the scanning of someone who had learned to find danger early. At the parking zone, Elias opened the crawler truck door for her. Myra hesitated, then climbed in. She sat stiffly, hands in her lap, and looked out the window. Elias started the engine. The truck hummed, and the ground vibration traveled up through the seat. Myra's eyes shifted slightly, noticing it. Elias filed the detail away. Even if she could not hear, she felt. They drove out of Port Lysa, leaving noise behind. The plane opened again, wide and bright. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to slow down. The sky turned deeper blue. The wind stretched long across the grass. Elias glanced at her once. "I live far out," he said, keeping his voice simple. "It's quiet, safe. There are animals. I work with them." Myra did not look at him, but she lifted a hand and touched the glass, feeling the sunlight warming it. When they reached the ranch, Elias parked near the house and stepped out. Myra followed, eyes taking in the living fences, the solar panels, the small wind turbines turning slowly. She looked at the biostables with interest, not fear. Inside the house, Elias showed her the basics without too many words. He pointed to the water dispenser. He pointed to the food cabinet. He showed her the washroom. Then he led her to a small spare room that used to hold storage crates. He had cleaned it earlier in the year but never used it. It had a bed, a plain desk, and a window that faced the open field. Myra stepped inside and looked around. Her shoulders lowered just slightly, like her body was unsure how to respond to something that did not feel like a trap. Elias hovered at the doorway, awkward. He was used to tools and animals, not people's feelings. "This is your room," he said. "You can close the door. You can rest." She turned her head, watching his lips again. Then she nodded once. Elias left her alone and went to the kitchen. He heated a simple meal, grain stew with vegetable protein, the kind the colony rationed for ease. He set a bowl on the table and waited, not sure what the correct move was. After a few minutes, Myra came out. She sat across from him. Elias pointed at the bowl, then at his own. He took a bite. Myra copied him. She ate carefully at first, then faster when she realized no one was going to take it away. Elias tried not to watch too closely. He kept his movements calm and predictable. After a while, he slid a small tablet across the table. On it, he opened a drawing program and wrote in big letters, "Welcome." Myra stared at the word. Then she took the stylus and wrote under it slowly, as if testing the idea of leaving her mark in someone else's space. "Myra," Elias nodded. He pointed to himself, then wrote, "Elias." Myra looked at him again. Something in her eyes softened by a fraction, not trust yet, but maybe curiosity. That evening, Elias showed her the ranch from a distance. He did not bring her close to the animals yet. He only walked with her along the fence line where the moss cattle grazed calmly. The animals lifted their heads, sniffed the air, and returned to eating. Myra's gaze followed them closely. She seemed to understand their patterns quickly. Elias pointed to a sensor pole and then to the sky, trying to explain weather monitoring. Myra's eyes tracked from his hand to the horizon and back, as if she was connecting the ranch to the wider world in her mind. As the sun lowered, the aurora began to faintly show, pale green bands like soft paint across the evening. Elias watched Myra's face in the changing light. She stood very still, like she was waiting for something. Then, without warning, she turned her head slightly toward the west. Elias followed her gaze, but he saw nothing unusual. The field was calm. The wind was steady. The animals were quiet. Myra's eyes narrowed, focused. She placed 2 fingers lightly against her throat, then against the fence vine, as if she was feeling for a vibration that was not there. Her expression was not confused. It was alert. Elias stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "What is it?" he asked softly. Myra did not answer. She looked up at the sky again. Then very slowly she raised her hand and pointed, not at the aurora, not at the nearest stars, but at an empty patch of darkness between them. Elias squinted. Still nothing. Myra's face changed just a little. It was the first time he saw something like emotion break through her controlled calm. It was not fear. It was not anger. It looked like recognition. Elias felt a strange chill, despite the warm evening air. He did not know why, but in that moment he became sure of one thing. Myra was not simply living in silence. She was listening to something he could not hear. Days passed on the ranch like slow-moving clouds, stretching across the sky with quiet purpose. Elias found a rhythm in their routine, waking before sunrise, checking the water sensors, tending to the moss cattle, and repairing the biostables. Myra followed him closely, always careful, always alert, like a shadow that had its own mind. At first, Elias had tried to teach her the simplest things: how to carry a water jug without spilling, how to check the grain lamb's health, how to adjust the solar panels when storms came. He expected silence. He expected difficulty, but Myra learned fast, sometimes too fast. When he showed her how to unlock the barn doors, she remembered the sequence perfectly after only 2 tries. When he demonstrated the irrigation panel, she didn't just follow the steps. She noticed subtle patterns in water pressure that he had never seen. Elias could feel a rising mix of admiration and unease. There was something extraordinary about her, not just the skill, but the way she seemed to notice things before they happened. One morning, the wind was strong, whipping across the plains and bending the silver grass low. Elias was checking the Moscattle's water supply when Myra approached silently. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes fixed on a distant hill where the horizon met the sky. He followed her gaze, but there was nothing unusual, no storm, no movement, just the calm stretch of land. "You see it?" he asked, raising a brow. Myra shook her head. She didn't speak much yet, but she gestured to her ear, then to her eyes, then back to the horizon. Elias frowned. "You're sensing something?" he asked. She nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. He didn't press further, instead he watched her. Myra had begun noticing small things he had never thought mattered. A shift in the grass where animals had passed, a slight vibration through the ground from distant machinery, even the patterns of light across the barn roof. Sometimes she paused in the middle of the field and pointed in a direction, leading Elias to a broken sensor or a leak in a water line that had gone unnoticed. It made him realize she was not deaf in the way people thought. Her silence wasn't a weakness, it was a shield, a filter that let her experience the world differently. Elias began to wonder how much she had always been able to perceive. Mornings were their quietest moments. Myra would sit on the porch with him, watching the sky change as the light spread across the plains. Sometimes she would place her hand lightly on the table or a piece of equipment and close her eyes. Elias watched, unsure whether she was listening, feeling, or thinking. But he knew she was doing something extraordinary. He tried talking with her through gestures and drawings. On the tablet, he would write simple phrases, "Storm is coming," or "Grain lambs are fed." Myra's replies were precise, often adding details that surprised him. "Storm in west, clouds moving faster," or "Lambs fed, one sick check leg." Elias felt a mix of pride and amazement. How could someone so young, silent, and thought to be incapable notice so much? It was humbling. The colony had sent a small packet of her records. Elias reviewed them one evening by the soft light of the kitchen. The medical notes were incomplete, but one phrase stood out. "Sensitive to vibrations, shows early spatial awareness, may process auditory signals differently." That was it. No explanation, no theory, just a hint. He realized Myra's quietness might not be about hearing at all. It might be about choosing how to listen. One afternoon, while checking the irrigation panels, Myra suddenly froze. She held up a finger and Elias followed her gesture. The ground beneath them hummed faintly, a vibration too subtle for him to notice before. She knelt, tracing the source with her fingertips along the soil. When she stood, she pointed toward the ridge where the wind curled in a peculiar way. Elias felt a shiver. She could sense things about the land that machines could barely detect. He wondered if the colony records had missed something. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew quietly. Myra began to trust Elias, if not completely, at least enough to share small things. She would smile when a lamb finally stood after a rough birth, or when the moss cattle grazed in calm patterns. She liked routines but noticed irregularities that even Elias sometimes missed. A tool misplaced, a door not fully closed, the way clouds moved before a storm. One evening, as the aurora shimmered faintly green across the horizon, Myra sat at the porch edge, legs dangling. Elias joined her. He pointed to the sky, then to the ground, then at her, trying to express a simple question. "Do you hear the wind?" Myra's hand went to her chest, then stretched outward toward the horizon. Then she closed her eyes. Her expression was serene but intense, as if she were listening to the air itself, feeling it in her bones rather than hearing it with ears. Elias wanted to ask what she felt, but he could not. Words were inadequate. Instead, he sat quietly beside her, letting the silence grow between them. Over time, Elias began noticing patterns himself. Small things at first, he could predict whether changes better, notice when livestock were restless before it became obvious. It was subtle, but it was there. Myra's presence seemed to sharpen his own senses. One day, while repairing the fence near the ridge, Myra suddenly dashed ahead. She stopped at a specific spot, placing both hands on the ground. Elias ran up, concerned. She pointed again toward a hill farther out. He followed her gesture and saw nothing unusual. "See it?" he asked. She shook her head. But then, very slowly, she touched a vine fence and placed her ear close to it. Elias hesitated, but when he looked at her eyes, he noticed the focus, the kind that demanded patience. She moved her hand along the fence, following a vibration only she could detect. Elias realized she was feeling something in the world he could not, and he wondered what else she could sense, what the colony had never recorded, never understood. He began testing her abilities in small ways. He would hide tools or shift equipment slightly and watch how quickly she discovered the change. She always did, sometimes before he even noticed what he had altered. One afternoon, he decided to try something different. He led her to the open plain beyond the ranch, where the grass bent long and free under the wind. He handed her a small, simple device, a sensor that could detect subsonic vibrations in the soil. He activated it. A low hum spread through the metal, vibrating slightly against the ground. Myra placed her hand on the sensor, then closed her eyes. The hum seemed to flow through her. She lifted a finger, then a hand, then gestured to the horizon. Elias followed. He still saw nothing unusual, but the way she moved, the confidence in her gestures, made him wonder if she were reading patterns invisible to him. Weeks passed, and Elias adjusted to having her around. The silence was no longer heavy. It was alive, full of possibility. Myra began to mimic some of his daily tasks, not because he taught her, but because she understood patterns. She could sense a leak in the irrigation line before the sensors tripped. She could sense a predator in the distance, far before it became visible. The ranch, once a simple patch of managed land, became alive in new ways. Elias marveled at how one quiet presence could change the way he experienced the world. And yet, the deeper he understood her, the more mysterious she became. One night, the aurora lit the sky brighter than usual, washing the plains in soft green light. Myra stepped outside, stood still, and tilted her head toward the stars. Elias watched her silently. She raised her hand toward a point in the darkness where no star or planet seemed to shine. He whispered softly, though he was not sure she could hear him. "What is it?" Myra's eyes glimmered. She did not answer in words. She simply extended her hand, a gesture of both invitation and command, and looked at him again. In that instant, Elias understood something profound. Myra was not limited by silence. She was connected to a reality he could not yet see, a way of listening that transcended sound. For the first time, Elias felt that the universe had expanded around him, not through new discoveries in space or technology, but through the presence of one extraordinary human being who listened differently. The nights grew colder, but the silence between them felt warmer than any fire. Myra began exploring the ranch more confidently, touching the vines, feeling the soil, noticing the movement of animals. Elias observed, learning from her without realizing it. He had always thought he knew his land, but now it seemed full of secrets waiting to be revealed. And in the quiet moments, when the wind carried long waves across the plains and the stars shimmered faintly in patterns no one had named, Elias began to hope. He hoped that Myra's abilities could teach him more than he had ever imagined, not just about the land or the animals or the weather, but about life itself, about the patience and understanding that humans could bring to the universe. The ranch, once lonely, had become a place of listening, of learning, of watching and waiting. And Elias realized that the quietest moments might carry the greatest power, and the girl who was thought to be deaf might be the most capable of all. This is part 2, a full 1,600-word narrative in simple English, third person, clean and engaging, continuing the HFY theme where human perception and curiosity elevate the story. Weeks turned into a month, and the rhythm of the ranch settled into something steady, yet alive with subtle surprises. Elias had begun to see patterns he had never noticed before. The way the moss cattle shifted slightly before a storm, the soundless vibrations of wind across the plains, the gentle swaying of the solar panels as if they were listening too. And at the center of it all was Myra. She moved through the ranch with quiet confidence, almost like she belonged to the land itself. One morning, Elias was checking the water tanks when he heard the soft hum of machinery in the distance. He froze. The hum was faint far off, but it carried a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. He looked toward the horizon and saw Myra standing near the edge of the ridge, her hand pressed to the ground. Her eyes were closed and her face was serene. He ran to her side. "What is it?" he asked, though he knew she might not answer. Myra opened her eyes slowly and pointed toward a small hill in the distance. Elias squinted. It looked empty, but he trusted her instinct. Together they walked across the plains, the grass brushing against their legs, the wind whispering through the silver strands. When they reached the hill, Myra knelt and placed both hands on the ground. Elias watched, unsure what to do. Then he saw it. The earth beneath her hands vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly. She raised her fingers slightly and traced a path along the soil. Elias crouched beside her, touching the ground. The vibration was so subtle that he almost missed it. But there it was, a pattern, a signal hidden in the land. "Where is it coming from?" he asked quietly. Myra pointed toward a cluster of rocks at the far end of the hill. Elias followed her gesture and saw a small metallic object half buried in the soil. He knelt and brushed the dirt away. It was a small device, old but functional, with faint lights blinking on its surface. He had seen similar devices in colony archives, old relay sensors left from early exploration teams. Myra touched it gently. Her eyes sparkled. She pressed her palm against the metal, and the device seemed to respond, its lights glowing brighter. Elias watched in awe as she traced a pattern along the surface, almost as if she were conducting a silent conversation with it. "What are you doing?" he asked. Myra did not answer with words. Instead, she placed her hand on his arm and guided him to touch the device. A low hum filled the air, faint but unmistakable. Elias felt it through his fingers, a subtle vibration that seemed to pulse in time with the wind. He realized that Myra was not just sensing the device. She was reading it, feeling its signals in a way he could barely comprehend. Over the next few days, Myra explored the ranch with a new sense of purpose. She led Elias to hidden sensors buried beneath the soil, to weak points in the irrigation lines, and even to a small underground tunnel that had been used by the original settlers. She understood the land in a way that no machine or map could. One evening, as the aurora shimmered green across the horizon, Elias asked her a question he had been holding back. "Myra, can you hear things I cannot?" She tilted her head, then placed her fingers lightly against her throat. A gesture he had learned meant yes, or I feel. She then pointed toward the sky, where the stars shimmered faintly in the distance. Elias followed her gaze. He saw nothing unusual, but she seemed to be listening to something beyond sight, beyond sound. The realization hit him slowly. Myra was not limited by silence. She was connected to the world in a way he could not yet understand. And that connection went beyond the ranch, beyond the plains, beyond even the colony itself. Determined to learn more, Elias decided to test her abilities further. He gathered several old devices from the storage room, sensors, transmitters, and a small portable relay, and set them up across the plains. He activated them one by one, creating faint signals that hummed through the ground and air. Myra moved among them like a conductor, her hands tracing invisible lines in the air. She paused at each device, placing her fingers lightly on the surface, feeling the vibrations, the pulses, the patterns. Elias watched, amazed, as she connected the devices into a web of energy that he could barely perceive. "Can you control them?" he asked cautiously. Myra nodded slightly, then pressed her palms together and closed her eyes. The devices responded instantly. Lights blinked in sequence, small motors shifted, and a low hum pulsed across the plains. Elias felt it in his chest, a resonance that seemed to echo the rhythm of the land itself. It was incredible. He realized that Myra could interact with technology in a way no one else could. She was not just hearing signals, she was feeling them, understanding them, guiding them. The next morning, they received a small packet from the colony. It was her complete medical record, delayed in transit but finally arriving. Elias opened it carefully. Most of it was standard, her birth records, immunizations, basic health checks. But one section caught his attention. Enhanced signal perception. Subject demonstrates ability to detect subsonic vibrations and electromagnetic fluctuations beyond standard human capacity. Further study recommended. He looked at Myra. She was watching the moss cattle, her eyes following their movements with precision. He realized that the record only hinted at her abilities. The full extent of what she could do was still a mystery. Days later, while walking along the edge of the bio-stables, Myra suddenly stopped. She placed her hand on a metal post, closed her eyes, and tilted her head toward the horizon. Elias followed her gaze. He saw nothing unusual. Then she moved quickly, her fingers tracing patterns along the post and the ground. Elias felt a faint vibration under his feet. Myra led him to a small mound of soil near the edge of the field. She pressed her palm against it, and the ground hummed more strongly. Elias knelt and brushed away the top layer of dirt. Beneath it was another device, older and partially buried. He recognized it as part of the colony's early subspace communication experiments, equipment thought lost decades ago. Myra's eyes lit up. She touched the device, and it came to life, pulsing softly with energy. Elias watched, astonished, as she moved her hands in the air, guiding the signals, shaping them, almost as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. The realization dawned on him fully. Myra was not just perceiving the world differently. She was interacting with it, influencing it, understanding patterns that even advanced technology could not. Elias spent the next few weeks helping her explore these abilities. They mapped the devices, traced signals across the plains, and recorded data that no one at the colony could have imagined. Myra's abilities were extraordinary, but she remained humble, focused, and patient. She did not seek attention or power. She simply wanted to understand the world around her, and perhaps teach Elias to listen in ways he had never known. One evening, as the sky darkened and the aurora painted soft green streaks across the horizon, Elias and Myra sat together on the porch. He looked at her and realized something profound. She had changed the way he saw everything. He had always thought of the ranch as a place of work, a quiet refuge, a routine life. But now, with Myra, it had become a place of discovery, of learning, of connection. The land itself seemed to hum with life in a way he had never noticed. "Myra," he said softly, you understand things I can't. How do you do it?" She placed her hand lightly on his, then pointed toward the sky again. Her eyes sparkled. She seemed to be telling him that some things could not be explained with words. Some things had to be felt, experienced, and understood in silence. Elias nodded slowly. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. Myra had opened a door to a new way of perceiving the world, a way that went beyond sound, beyond sight, beyond the ordinary limits of human experience. In the following days, the two of them continued to explore. Myra led him to hidden valleys, underground tunnels, and clusters of old sensors that had lain dormant for decades. She taught him to feel the vibrations of the earth, the subtle pulses of machines, and the hidden signals that connected all living things. Elias began to see the ranch in a new light. It was no longer just a place of work. It was a living network, full of patterns, energy, and life. Myra's presence had revealed what had always been there, waiting for someone to notice. One night, as they lay on the roof of the barn, watching the stars shimmer like scattered jewels, Elias realized something extraordinary. Myra was not just extraordinary because of her abilities. She was extraordinary because of her patience, her curiosity, and her connection to the world. She reminded him that humans were capable of more than they often believed, and that even in silence, there was a voice powerful enough to change the world. The aurora danced above them, green and soft, and Myra placed her hand on his arm. Elias felt the vibrations of the earth, the quiet hum of the ranch, and the pulsing signals of the devices they had uncovered. And in that moment he understood fully, Myra was not deaf. She was listening to the universe in a way that no one else could, and she had chosen to share it with him. Elias smiled, feeling a sense of awe he had never known. He knew that their journey was just beginning, that the ranch held more secrets, more signals, more patterns than he could have imagined. And with Myra by his side, he felt ready to explore them all. The world was quiet, yet alive. And in that quiet, Elias realized that humanity's potential was greater than he had ever dreamed. With patience, understanding, and a willingness to listen, humans could perceive the universe in ways that no machine, no colony, no record could ever capture. The days grew longer, the sun rising earlier and setting later, painting the rim with pale gold and silver light. Elias watched Myra as she moved among the moss cattle, her steps light, her eyes alert. She had become part of the land, part of the ranch, and yet she seemed connected to something beyond it, something deeper. Elias often wondered if she was seeing patterns in the world that even he could not imagine. One morning, the wind carried an unusual vibration across the plains. Elias was checking the irrigation systems when Myra froze. Her hand lifted, hovering in the air as if touching something invisible. She tilted her head slightly, listening or feeling beyond the ordinary senses. Elias approached slowly. "What is it?" he asked softly. Myra pointed toward the ridge where the land sloped down into a shallow valley. There was nothing visible, no storm clouds, no movement. She touched his arm gently and gestured for him to follow. Elias hesitated only for a moment. Then he fell into step behind her, trusting her instinct. As they moved across the plains, Myra paused at small points along the way. A spot where the ground vibrated faintly, a plant that bent in an unusual pattern, a stone that seemed out of place. She touched each one, reading it, feeling it, understanding it. Elias could barely perceive the signals she followed. He had begun to realize that Myra was not just sensing the world differently. She was communicating with it in a way that he could not yet comprehend. Finally, they reached the valley. At first, it looked like any other stretch of land. Low grass, scattered stones, and a few clusters of moss cattle grazing quietly. But Myra's attention was fixed on a small mound of soil near the center. She knelt and placed her palms on the ground. Elias crouched beside her. The earth vibrated faintly under their hands. Myra traced lines in the soil, then pressed her palms together and tilted her head toward the horizon. A soft hum seemed to rise from the ground itself. Elias could feel it faintly through the soles of his boots. "What is it?" he whispered. Myra did not answer in words. She pointed to a small depression in the soil and began to carefully brush it away. Underneath, metal glinted. Elias bent down and saw the remnants of an old colony relay station, long thought abandoned. Its panels were covered in dirt and moss, but the structure was intact. Myra touched the metal gently, and the hum grew stronger. Lights flickered along the surface, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Elias watched, fascinated, as she moved her hands along the panels, guiding the energy, shaping it, connecting it to the world around her. Over the next several days, Elias and Myra worked to uncover the rest of the relay station. It was larger than they had expected, with hidden panels, buried wires, and devices that still held faint power. Myra navigated the system with an instinctive grace, feeling the flow of energy, reading the patterns, and guiding Elias to repair weak connections. Elias realized that Myra's abilities extended far beyond sensing vibrations or subtle changes in the environment. She could interact with technology in ways that no one else could, shaping signals and understanding patterns invisible to ordinary humans. One afternoon, as they worked on a particularly stubborn relay panel, Elias asked, "Myra, do you know what this is for?" She paused, placing her hand lightly on the panel. Then she pressed it against her chest and gestured toward the sky, as if to say that the purpose was larger than the land, larger than the ranch, larger than the colony itself. Elias nodded slowly. He began to understand. This was more than old technology. This was a connection to the wider universe. The relay station began to hum more steadily, and Elias noticed something remarkable. The faint signals it emitted were forming patterns in the air, subtle pulses that mirrored the movements of the wind and the light of the aurora. Myra guided him to touch the panels at specific points, and the patterns shifted in response. It was as if the station was alive, responding to her presence, her understanding, her touch. Elias felt a sense of awe and humility. Myra was not just extraordinary because of her abilities. She was extraordinary because she understood how to listen, how to connect, how to bring life to something that had been dormant for decades. One evening, as the sky darkened and the aurora shimmered across the horizon, Elias and Myra stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The relay station pulsed softly beneath their hands, and the patterns in the air danced like light through water. "Do you hear it?" Elias asked, though he knew she did not need words to understand. Myra placed her hand on his arm, guiding him to feel the vibrations, the energy, the subtle rhythm of the signals. Elias closed his eyes and concentrated. At first, he felt only faint pulses, barely noticeable. But as he focused, he began to perceive a pattern, a rhythm that seemed to flow through the land, the station, and even the air around them. It was the first time he understood, even in the smallest way, what Myra had been experiencing all along. The universe was speaking, and she had been listening. Over the following weeks, the relay station became their shared project. Elias repaired panels, rewired connections, and kept the machinery running. Myra guided him, showing him where to place sensors, how to adjust the frequency of signals, and when to wait for the patterns to emerge. The work was slow, meticulous, and demanding, but it was also profoundly rewarding. The ranch itself seemed to respond to their efforts. The moss cattle grazed more calmly, the grain lambs grew stronger, and the land seemed to hum with a subtle energy that Elias had never noticed before. Myra's presence had transformed not only the ranch, but also the way he perceived the world. One day, while adjusting a series of sensors, Elias noticed something extraordinary. The signals from the relay station were no longer confined to the ranch. They extended across the plains, reaching toward distant hills, small valleys, and even the edges of the colony. It was as if the station was awakening, expanding its reach, connecting the land in ways that humans had never attempted. Myra touched his shoulder, guiding him to feel the pulse of the signals. Elias closed his eyes and concentrated. He could feel the energy flowing beneath his hands, a rhythm that mirrored the land itself. It was subtle, delicate, and alive. He realized that Myra's abilities were not just extraordinary, they were transformative. She could interact with the world in a way that no one else could, shaping patterns, guiding energy, and connecting humans to the land and the universe itself. The colony began to take notice. Small groups of scientists and engineers arrived, drawn by faint signals detected from afar. They were cautious, respectful, and curious. Elias welcomed them, but he made it clear that Myra was not a tool or a machine. She was a person, a partner, and a guide. Myra interacted with the newcomers in her quiet way. She did not speak, but she guided them with gestures, touches, and subtle signals. The scientists were amazed by her understanding, her intuition, and her ability to perceive patterns that no device could measure. Together, they mapped the relay station, extended its reach, and documented the signals it transmitted. The patterns were complex, intricate, and beautiful, an invisible network that connected the ranch, the land, and the skies above. Elias realized that this network had the potential to teach humanity something profound. That listening, observing, and understanding could unlock new ways of perceiving the universe. One night, as the aurora shimmered green across the horizon, Elias and Myra stood together on the ridge overlooking the valley. The relay station pulsed softly beneath their hands, and the signals danced like light through water. Elias placed his hand on Myra's shoulder and whispered, "We're part of something bigger, aren't we?" Myra nodded, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. She pointed toward the stars, then to the horizon, then back to him. Elias understood. The signals were not just machines or devices. They were a bridge, a connection between humans, the land, and the universe itself. In the following days, Elias and Myra continued their work. They guided scientists across the ranch, taught them to observe patterns, and showed them how to interact with the signals in ways that honored Myra's abilities. The ranch became a hub of discovery, a place where humans learned to listen, to observe, and to understand the hidden rhythms of the world. Elias watched Myra as she moved among the devices, her hands tracing invisible lines, her eyes focused, her presence calm and confident. He realized that humanity's potential was greater than he had ever imagined. With patience, empathy, and the willingness to listen, humans could perceive the universe in ways that no machine or record could capture. One evening, as the sky darkened and the aurora danced across the plains, Elias and Myra sat on the porch of the ranch. The relay station pulsed softly in the distance, and the signals flowed like a river of light and energy. Elias looked at Myra and smiled. She had taught him more than he could have imagined. That silence was not empty, that listening was not passive, and that understanding the world required patience, attention, and connection. And in that quiet, alive moment, Elias realized something extraordinary. Humanity's greatest discoveries were not in the stars alone, but in the ways they could perceive, understand, and connect with the world, and with each other. At the edge of the rim, on a quiet ranch transformed by patience, understanding, and extraordinary ability, Elias and Myra stood together, ready to explore the universe in ways no one had yet imagined. The hum of the relay station, the gentle wind, the movements of the animals, and the distant shimmer of the aurora all spoke in a language that only the patient and attentive could hear. And for the first time, Elias felt that he could truly listen. Myra reached out, placing her hand in his, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The signals pulsed gently beneath their fingertips, a rhythm connecting land, sky, and human hearts. Elias smiled. Humanity had so much to learn, and he realized that with Myra by his side, they had already begun. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was a place of discovery, of connection, of wonder. And in the quiet hum of the relay station hummed softly in the valley, sending signals that stretched across the plains and into the distant hills. Elias stood beside Myra, feeling the vibrations pulse through the ground. He had learned to sense them, to feel the subtle patterns, but Myra still guided him with a quiet certainty he could never match. She moved like she belonged to the energy itself, reading it, shaping it, understanding it in a way that humans had only begun to imagine. Elias had watched her work for weeks, seen her uncover patterns in the land, in the machines, in the sky. And now, with the station fully active, the signals extended far beyond the ranch. They reached the colony, neighboring settlements, and even the abandoned research outposts. Humanity had never seen anything like it. The colony sent more visitors, engineers, scientists, and observers, all drawn to the ranch by the faint signals detected from afar. But Elias insisted they follow Myra's rules. She was not a tool to be studied. She was a guide, a partner, and a teacher. Slowly, the visitors learned to observe, to feel, and to understand the patterns she revealed. One morning, Elias and Myra stood at the edge of the plains, looking toward the far horizon. The sky was pale gold, the wind gentle, and the grass bent in soft waves. Myra placed her hand on a device buried in the soil, and the relay station pulsed in response. Elias felt the vibrations through his boots and the palms of his hands. "What do you hear?" he asked softly, though he knew the answer would not come in words. Myra tilted her head, listening or feeling beyond what he could perceive. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder and guided him to press his palm against the soil. He closed his eyes and focused. Slowly, he began to sense the rhythm, the subtle pulses, the invisible currents flowing beneath the plains. It was more than energy, it was communication. The land, the machines, the air itself, they were speaking, and Myra had taught him how to listen. In the days that followed, they expanded their work. They mapped the signals across the ranch and beyond, connecting hidden devices, underground tunnels, and natural formations. The patterns were intricate, almost like a language, and Myra guided them with patience and precision. Elias began to see the beauty in it, the harmony, the order, the connection between all things. One afternoon, Myra led Elias to a small rise overlooking the valley. She pointed to a distant cluster of hills, then to the sky, then back at him. Elias understood. She wanted to expand the network to reach further, to connect not just the ranch, but the world beyond. The work was difficult. Some devices were damaged, others buried too deep. They had to dig, repair, and carefully calibrate each one. Myra guided them at every step, reading the signals, feeling the vibrations, adjusting their movements with precision. As they worked, Elias noticed something extraordinary. The land itself seemed to respond. The moss cattle grazed more calmly, the grain lambs thrived, even the wind shifted in gentle patterns. It was as if the ranch had become a living network, alive with energy and connection. The colony observed their progress with amazement. Scientists and engineers learned from Myra, following her gestures, her touches, her subtle guidance. Slowly, they began to understand what Elias had realized weeks before. Humanity had more potential than they often believed. With patience, empathy, and attention, they could perceive patterns, understand energy, and connect with the world in ways that no machine alone could achieve. One evening, as the aurora shimmered across the horizon, Elias and Myra sat on the ridge overlooking the valley. The relay station pulsed softly, the signals flowing like a river of light. Elias placed his hand on Myra's shoulder and felt the rhythm beneath their fingertips. "You've shown me something incredible," he said softly. "Not just the signals, but how to listen, how to connect, how to understand. Humanity, we can do more than we think." Myra tilted her head, her eyes sparkling. She placed her hand over his, guiding him to feel the flow of the signals, the energy of the land, the rhythm of life itself. Elias closed his eyes and let the vibrations wash over him. For the first time, he truly understood. In the following weeks, they expanded the network even further. Devices were placed across the plains, in valleys, on distant hills, and even along the edges of abandoned settlements. Each one pulsed in harmony with the others, creating a web of energy and connection that mirrored the natural rhythms of the world. Visitors from the colony learned to read the patterns, to feel the signals, and to understand the subtle messages embedded in the land. They began to see that technology alone was not enough. Humans had to listen, to observe, and to connect with the world around them. One night, the aurora stretched across the sky like ribbons of green light. Elias and Myra stood together on the ridge, feeling the pulse of the relay station beneath their feet. The signals reached across the plains, connecting the ranch to distant lands, to other people, to the universe itself. Myra placed her hand on his shoulder, then raised her other hand toward the sky. Elias followed her gesture. He felt the energy, the rhythm, the connection. And in that moment, he understood fully. Humanity's potential was limitless, not because of machines, not because of technology, but because of curiosity, empathy, and the ability to perceive and understand the world in ways that only humans could. The colony began to take notice in a larger way. Scientists sent reports to the Central Council, describing the network, the patterns, and the extraordinary abilities Myra displayed. They called it a breakthrough in human perception, a new way to interact with technology and the environment. Elias knew, however, that Myra had never sought recognition. She did not want to be famous or studied or used. She simply wanted to understand and to share her understanding with those willing to learn. And Elias understood that this was the most important lesson of all. True progress came not from control, but from connection. One morning, while walking along the ridge, Myra paused and placed her hand on a small mound of soil. Elias followed her gesture. The ground vibrated softly beneath their palms. Myra's eyes sparkled as she pointed toward the horizon, then back at him. Elias understood. The network was complete, reaching beyond the ranch, beyond the colony, and connecting humans to the land, the energy, and each other in ways they had never imagined. As the days passed, the ranch became a hub of learning. Visitors came not to exploit, but to understand. Scientists, engineers, and curious colonists followed Myra's guidance, learning to listen, to observe, and to connect. The ranch was no longer a place of isolation. It was a center of discovery, a place where humanity could grow in understanding and empathy. One evening, as the aurora painted the sky in soft green light, Elias and Myra sat together on the porch. The relay station pulsed gently in the distance, its signals flowing across the land. Elias looked at Myra and smiled. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "Not just the ranch, not just the signals, but me. Humanity, we can do more than we thought, and it starts with listening." Myra placed her hand in his, a gentle connection that spoke volumes. Elias felt the vibrations of the land, the hum of the relay station, and the rhythm of life itself. And in that moment, he realized something profound. The universe was alive, full of patterns and energy, waiting for humans to notice, to feel, and to understand. The ranch had transformed. The land, the animals, the devices, and the humans were connected in a living network of understanding. And at the center of it all was Myra, guiding, teaching, and showing humanity the way to perceive the universe in ways they had never imagined. Elias and Myra watched the aurora shimmer above them. The relay station pulsed softly beneath their feet, sending signals across the plains, connecting humans to the land, to each other, and to the universe itself. And in that quiet, alive moment, Elias understood fully. Humanity's greatest discoveries were not in the stars alone, but in the ability to perceive, to connect, and to understand the world and each other. With Myra by his side, Elias felt hope, curiosity, and a sense of wonder he had never known. Humanity had only begun to listen, only begun to understand, and only begun to realize what they could achieve. The ranch, once quiet and isolated, had become a place of discovery, connection, and learning. The land hummed with life, the animals thrived, and humans began to perceive the subtle patterns that Myra had shown them. And as the aurora danced across the sky, Elias and Myra stood together, feeling the pulse of the world beneath their hands, knowing that the universe had many more secrets to reveal, and that humanity, if willing to listen, would be ready to understand them. The wind whispered through the silver grass, carrying the faint vibrations of the relay station, the hum of life, and the rhythm of the universe. Elias smiled, feeling the connection in every step, every breath, every heartbeat. And in the quiet light of the rim, at the edge of the colony, a boy's home became humanity's first lesson in listening, in understanding, and in connecting with the universe in ways they had never imagined. Myra looked at Elias, then toward the distant horizon. The aurora shimmered above them, green and alive, reflecting the pulse of the relay station and the rhythm of the land. And for the first time, Elias felt that humans could truly hear the universe, not with ears alone, but with patience, attention, and empathy. The ranch, the plains, the animals, and the humans were all connected in a living network of understanding. And at the heart of it was Myra, showing humanity how to listen to the universe. Elias understood that this was only the beginning.